Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen,
And I'm Debbie.
and today we're going to be talking about the infamous Jewish goodbye. This is something that changes a lot in different people's families or cultures, but we're going to talk about what it looks like in our family and what exactly is a Jewish goodbye and how it shows up in our gatherings. And we're also going to talk about our tendencies to have deep conversations in places that don't really lend themselves to having a deep conversation, why we do that, how that's happened, and is that a familial thing? Did my mom grow up doing that with her family? Because I grew up, mealtime was a time where we just gathered and talked and talked and talked and talked, and sometimes we wouldn't leave a restaurant until 3 hours later or when the restaurant was closing. And then even after that, we would stand outside the restaurant, continue talking, and then maybe say goodbye two or three more times after that. I don't know. It just depends on the situation. But in my reality, that was all very normal to me. It wasn't until I'm with my current partner now who was like, this is not something that I grew up doing. And so now it's a running joke in and between my partner and I that, okay, no Jewish goodbyes. Let's go. So, because I will do that. I will say goodbye to my friends a couple times before actually leaving. I don't see a problem with it. It's just part of my personality, I guess, at this point in my culture. But yeah, let's dive in, Mom. What do you think a Jewish goodbye is?
Well, I don't know if there's a general definition of a Jewish goodbye, but I think
Right.
what you just said, it might be, per family. But I know that other Jewish families sort of probably understand the Jewish goodbye. And when you were talking, I had this image in my mind of being at my Aunt Shirley's house. And she had a kind of a hallway from the living room to a pathway from the living room to the front door, and we would all line up as we were leaving. I mean, we would be bunched up. We had been together the whole evening, and we were talking, and we moved wherever the conversation moved us to, from the dining room to the living room. And then when it was time to go, people would gather their things, and then we would clump together and start moving towards the door. But eventually we became this line of people that would say goodbye as they got to the door, like the final okay. But we'd have to wait, like we queued up to say goodbye to my aunt and uncle when we were there, and then to my aunt when my uncle had passed away. But that's what I remember many times doing it, and nobody seemed to question that. Like, nobody tried to cut the line or say, I gotta go. We all just waited for each person to sort of have a mini conversation before the goodbye, and then out the door.
Yeah.
And then in where she lived, she was in a high-rise condo, and so then there was the potential for more discussing as people walked to the elevator or went down the stairs. And then finally to where we parked, and that's when people started to sort of separate because they had to go to their own cars. I guess the feeling that when I think of that and at other occasions similar, I feel like there's something very heartwarming about it, because you don't want to disengage from the person you've been with during that time. And there's something sort of magical about having that family experience. And then I know for myself, when I get in the car, I feel kind of like I need to take like a little bit of a deep breath, not because I'm like, oh my gosh, that was such an experience, but it was like, oh, okay, we did everything we could before we left each other.
So maybe the
Right?
Jewish goodbye, with the line and everything, it was kind of like one-on-one time with
Right.
each other before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you didn't get the chance to have the conversation with that person while you were there for 7 hours, you could do it for 3 more minutes before you left. Oh, gosh.
You know, a memory in my childhood is gathering at Chinese restaurants for
Uh-huh.
any and all events. Graduations, birthday parties, anniversaries, I don't know, anything. And we would sit around the huge table, circular round table, and just order everything. And just there was like I don't know, I think there's a better term for this now, but I think it's called a lazy Susan.
Why is that not PC?
That's probably not
Because
cool to
it's
say
'cause she's
anymore.
certainly not lazy. It's constantly going around in
Right,
circles.
it's a working Susan.
An underpaid working Susan,
An
perhaps.
underpaid, yeah, very tired working Susan.
Oh, golly. Too silly. Yeah.
Yeah, get it. Holding like the wonton soup and all the
Right.
noodle dishes. Anyway, but I mean, that was with grandmothers and uncles and aunts and cousins, and it was everybody in our family. And I
Right.
don't remember it ever being a short event by any means. It was not like a normal hour dinner. It was like kind of a slow meandering through a meal. And I
Yes.
really enjoyed that as a kid. I think, of course, when you're growing up, you don't realize that this is like normal to you until you start to meet people outside of your culture or family and learn about other people. But yeah, to me, that was just totally normal. And even if I was tired, we stayed. Like you weren't like, oh, Jen, we're gonna go to bed. It's past her bedtime, past our bedtime. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, just chill out.
Well, disclaimer, it probably wasn't a weeknight. I didn't forcefully keep you up on a
No,
school
of
night.
course not. No, of course not. But it comes to mind because I was at a wedding recently, and there was a young child there. I think she was the flower girl, and we were sitting next to the parents, and she had fallen asleep, basically, like near her food, and one of the parents was like, "Oh, do you think we should take her home? Like, is she comfortable? Are we being bad parents?" And I was like, no, I fell asleep at the table all the time, I'm sure, and also in a chair or across chairs or at events or gatherings like that. And I think it's totally normal and fine. Maybe that's not like a cultural thing for us or our family, but I don't remember ever being like, we're going to go home now because we were still gathering with the event or with the celebration or all of that. So to me, hearing that, I was like, oh, interesting. Like if it was, I don't recall you ever being like, let's leave during like a family event or like a major celebration kind of thing.
I think if a kid's having a major meltdown, it's probably time to go. But
Yes,
you don't want to keep them in that state. But no, generally, I think when kids are with family, they probably feel very comfortable, and falling asleep is not. I mean, sometimes they can't help it; they fall asleep, and sometimes they just feel comfortable enough to fall asleep or lean on the parent or somebody else that they know or yeah. I was thinking about beyond this whole thing about. God, I had a lot of thoughts. First of all, generally speaking, you were saying that we're in the restaurant and we stay there a while. Yeah, when you look around the restaurant, you notice that the tables around you have probably turned over 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
While our table is still the same table.
Yeah.
And honestly, I still do that. I do that with my husband, and I do that with my sister when we're just the two of us talking. I mean, I'll notice that we're sitting in Starbucks, let's say, and I'll look around and, oh, that guy with the computer's not there anymore. And then I'll look about, oh, and that guy, oh, a new guy came in. Oh, like 4 guys. And we're still talking. And even when we leave and we're talking to get to the door and we're still talking in the parking lot, and then we finally say goodbye and go. So I think it's just this, for our family, and maybe and particularly to myself, that nourishment that you get from being able to have conversation with close family members who kind of get you, and it's safe, and you don't want to leave that because it's like a little nest, and you get to or a bigger nest, depending upon how many people are involved, and you know that you are being accepted. At least that's how I felt growing up and as an adult with my family, and that they sort of automatically get you, even if maybe they don't totally get you, they're not going to let on that they don't get you.
Yeah.
And so you may feel more comfortable in that setting. I know that my nieces and nephews who have gotten married, some of their partners are a little overwhelmed by the amount of togetherness, talking. And partly it's because we don't live near each other. So when we do finally get to see each other, there's a lot to unload. You want to, and then sometimes for me, it's like I want to say all these things, but I know it might be overload, so I try to hold back. And then when I come back home, I feel like, oh, I didn't say these
X,
things I
Y, or
wanted
Z.
to
Yeah.
say, right? So sometimes I used to get upset with my mother when she would want to break us into smaller groups and see us in small groups. But now I kind of understand why she did that, because she couldn't have the conversation when there were seven of us around, but she could have it when there was only like two or three of us together. And there's particular conversation for particular individuals and couples and groups, right? But I always wanted to be all of us together, because I felt it felt a little bit rejecting to me, but maybe I'm just too darn sensitive, and I didn't want to be left out, because I didn't want to, I probably suffer from FOMO, and
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and I wanted to know what other people were talking about, but in essence they have the right to their own privacy with the person who's called that family group together, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe it comes from, like right now I'm over talking, maybe it comes from because our family was not core. There was a divorced family.
Oh, okay.
And maybe that sting of not being with your core family makes it even more important to want to not be invited to certain little gatherings. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? Like my
Yeah,
mom
I
would
can
come
understand
in from where she lived, and we'd all get together, and then all of a sudden we would group off. So I'll come and see you and you and you on this day, and I'll come and see you and you and you. I'm like, oh, well, I won't know what's going on over there. Maybe I didn't need to know, but I wanted to. And I think maybe because we were already fractured, that felt fracturing
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Divisive.
Right? Yeah. Because I don't remember when I was little, and maybe it was happening, but I don't know. I remember the family that got together all the time at my grandparents' house got together all the time at my grandparents' house. And I don't remember there being little groups that were branched
Right.
off.
Yeah.
I never heard anybody saying, well, your aunt's going to be meeting with this cousin and this cousin. I mean, I didn't hear that. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's part of it. Or maybe it's just my very deep tendency to want to be inclusionary.
Good. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the one-on-one time because you get deeper with conversation or with just like having that closeness with someone. But I also understand wanting to be inclusive too, because I feel like I am the person that tries to gather everyone in our family or like
Right.
create that kind of closeness. So I wonder if that comes from my own fracturing in our family too, where it's like, yeah, the losing of a parent makes you want to just like let's everyone come together, like gather together, and then I feel like the pressure to or the responsibility to make sure we're planning things or make sure we are together or that I have time to see everyone and things like that, especially living a far distance away. You have to communicate to everyone that you're going to see, or maybe if you're not going to see them, you have to still say, I'm going to be in town, but I don't have time to see you, or stuff like that, which gets to be challenging as well.
No, yeah, no, I think it is challenging. I wonder, I mean, I surmise it's different for people who live closer to each other.
Yeah.
And they live within a few minutes of each other, and they don't have that as much. Because even when I was growing up, my grandparents lived very close to where we lived. And so we were at my grandparents' house many weekends. And I don't remember, they would walk us out to the car and all that, we'd say goodbye, but it wasn't this long elongated goodbye unless other people that we hadn't seen for a while were there with us, right? So I think maybe proximity shortens the Jewish goodbye a little bit,
Sure.
but
yeah.
you're right, because you just want to it's like squeezing an orange, and not in a hurtful way, but wanting to get the most out of
Yeah.
the situation before you have to say goodbye, because you don't know how you're going to coordinate it the next time, and you want to keep those feelings and hold on to those feelings as long as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
wanna- what is it?
Yeah.
Milk it for all it's worth.
Exactly, right.
I mean, you and I grew up, we had long conversations all the time. I mean, you would answer so many questions of mine, and we would end up either driving around doing errands and having those conversations, and then by the time we got home, we would continue to have those conversations like an hour after we got home and be in the car. Do you remember those times?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Was that something, yeah, those were really important to me. Not that I can really remember what we talked about, but I can definitely remember topics and stuff because you were very open with me about all my questions because I was super inquisitive and very curious. But yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. What comes to mind really quickly, and I hope you can hold
Yeah.
on to your thought, is when the three of us, you and your brother and I, went to San Francisco for the college trip, and we were on a trolley near Pier 39. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a grandmother with her grandchild, and they were speaking Spanish. And the child would point to something and say, "Why?" in Spanish,
Oh, I
and
remember this.
and then the grandmother would answer it, and then she would ask again, and the grandmother would answer another thing, and it was like the whole entire time we were on the trolley, she never did not respond to her granddaughter's wishes to know what that was. What is that? Why? What are we doing? And it was just, I won't forget that because it was so precious, and to me it felt like the best humanity when you have a child with you and you're telling them things they want to know, right? And
Yeah.
as much as you can for their age, right? And I
Yeah.
think this kid was like 5, if I didn't mention that before. But I haven't forgotten it. And that was like, what was that, back in 2003?
3, yeah.
Yeah, that we
2002.
went on that
Yeah.
trip. Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Was that
so
how
I
was?
think, yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I think that's normal to the developmental stages of childhood. And that's why in another episode I said I just have a hard time with parents who don't respond.
Right.
It just makes me crazy because I think there's so much potential in responding. Now, look, I understand that I don't know the daily routine of these parents, and maybe this is the billionth question. And at the market, that was when they hit their limit, and I heard the limit, and I'm like,
Right.
what the heck?
Yeah.
But in general, I think that it's super important to answer these questions to the best of your ability. And if you don't know, be honest and say, you know what? I don't know. Let's find that out together.
Right. Yes,
Whi-
a learning
yeah,
opportunity. Yeah.
Right. Which not only keeps the kids' curiosity going, but also helps them to research and figure out how to find stuff.
Yeah.
Even if you're 5, you can go with them with a book and look things up. Now we have Google. It takes 2.5 seconds, but yeah,
I
totally
know.
different than when I was growing up. But
Yeah, you needed
so
to
you
get
were
out the
saying before
dictionary.
yeah,
Me too. I
right.
mean, I even
See,
grew up with the dictionary.
yeah, that's not that long ago. You asked me if you asked a lot of questions. I said yes.
Yeah.
Did you have something else you wanted to say about that?
Well, yeah, I was curious if that's something that you also were modeled with your parents or with your mom with long conversations. I know you've mentioned that you were an oversharer, but I'm curious, why do you think we had such deep conversations from such a young age, you and I?
Well, I was thinking about both. I was thinking about both my parents right now, and I'll start with my father because it's a different communication than with my mother. So, and then perhaps with us. So, my father was a very meticulous person, and he was very descriptive. So he would tell you things down to the little morsel.
So that's where you
Right.
get that from.
Right. And I remember
Wow.
one time when he had bought a house in a different city, and he said, "This is how you get here." And he told me so much detail that I was like lost. And the reason why that happened was because instead of just telling me the street names, he also said, "Okay, so when you come to the end of that street, you're going to see there's going to be like a little dip. So go down that little dip, and then there's going to be this curve." And I'm like, I'm trying to visualize and think about the dips and the curves without looking at the ridiculous, the signs, right?
Right,
So he
yeah.
was super descriptive
Yeah.
in the manner in which he would tell us how to fix something, how to build something, how to do something. It was like reading the actual owner's manual. In fact, the joke that we used to have together is if I bought a car or whatever new piece of equipment I bought, he would say, "Did you read the owner's manual?" And I'm like, "Hell no."
No.
And he would read it from beginning to end.
No
I mean,
way.
he was very interested, like especially if he bought a car. He knew all the nooks and crannies of that car, right? So I think that meticulousness, I mean, I can still see it because he would use his fingers to describe or hold things, imaginary things that weren't there, but to tell, you know what I mean? Like you put the screw in, whatever. So yeah, so I think that, so picture this, you have a dad who's super verbally articulate and wants to give you every single direction, and then you have a mother who just likes to talk. You put those two together, and you get a person who's super
like
meticulous and right, but talks a lot. Yeah, exactly. I think my dad talked too much for some of the directions he would give us, but he wasn't a huge talker when it came to social, because I think my mom talked a lot, and so he kind of went to the recesses, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, which I think my stepdad did too, because how do you compete with that?
Right.
And it wasn't like she was being obnoxious or anything like that. She was funny, and she imparted a lot of what she thought was appropriate knowledge. And when you grow up, sometimes you look back and say, oh, she wasn't really right about that, or it didn't just have to be that way, or that was not the right blah blah. But when you're in it as a child, you submerge yourself in it, you think everything she's saying is like the thing. Right? And you don't vary from that. Yeah. And so I respected my mom a great deal, and I looking back as a probably somewhere between 17 and 21, where I realized that some of the things that I modeled of hers may have been a little bit too rigid, right? Because it would have been right for her time, but maybe not right for my time. And so I had to say some mea culpas maybe later on in life, when I realized I was being maybe a little bit too rigid, because that's not really my personality. So the next part of that question was, how did that carry over to the two of us? And I think that my level of communication is what hers was, interspersed, or whatever. What's the word I'm trying to think of?
Interspersed? Integrated?
What? Integrated, yes, thank you. I don't know. Maybe it's early for recording. With his meticulous way of describing things. Yeah. So I know that even though people have told me I'm a good communicator, there are people who get lost in my descriptions.
Sure.
Because I have this need. I really want to put the person there, like I was there.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's what my dad wanted too. And so it's like, you don't have the owner's manual, so I'm going to describe the owner's manual to you.
Yeah. You're going to read this like I read it.
Right. Or I've driven to my new house several times now. I know all the bumps and dips and curves. I'm going to make it so that you know it too. So I think that I've realized as I've gotten older, throughout my life as I get older, that maybe I don't need to make it so that the person is in my experience, because everybody's perception is different, and what I'm describing might not resonate necessarily with them. Maybe I just need to, just the facts, Jack, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I have that too, but only with people I'm really comfortable with, because my partner will be like, I'll explain something, and then I'll keep going, and then I'll look over at them, and I can tell they're overwhelmed. And I'm like, I'm not done yet. I need to tell you all the things. Let me get that out of my system, because it just, you got to squeeze the toothpaste. You know what I mean? It's like, I want to share everything. I'm not like you in where I communicate so much detail, or I don't know. If I'm really excited about something, or I haven't talked to people the whole day, I tend to talk more. But I have to be super comfortable, whereas I feel like you are like that all the time with everybody, which is wonderful. And I wish I had that. But maybe the other side of me, from who I come from, is maybe that's the blending where that kind of stops. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think your dad and his family communicate well when they're with family, but I don't know that they're able to, I think, put boundaries around that. And I realize that I need to do that too, because my father, he used to engage people in the supermarket. I was with him at the supermarket, and I would see what he did, and that looked like fun to do that, and people seem to enjoy that, so I do that. And nowadays, when people are a little bit reticent to get close to people, and they're not sure, and there's a lot of mistrust, I kind of wish I felt like I could still do that and bridge that mistrust, but at the same token, I know that I have to pull back, because I don't want to come across as some weird old woman in the supermarket engaging strangers that they don't know. But people, if they make small talk with me, then I will make small talk with them.
Yeah.
And I feel there's sometimes intuitively I know the person would be okay with it, and I'll say something to them if we wind up on the same aisle. But I have sort of dialed back on
Yeah.
those small interactions because I'm not sure people are as open to that as maybe they would have been,
Yeah.
years ago.
Right.
And especially if you're in a certain age bracket and you remember that, you're more willing than if you're a younger person who hasn't had that same way of communicating. And with all the devices that we have, the communication has changed. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's really tough for a younger person to engage with somebody face to face, eye to eye, right?
Yeah.
So I do have that from my father,
Sure.
where he would kind of joke around with people.
Well, I'm thinking about our conversations, and maybe we're talking about bonding and closeness, and I feel like that's how you and I bond is probably through conversations because we don't like do activities together necessarily. There's like families that like go on hiking trips or camping or vacations together. Like, I mean, not that we haven't done that, but most of our time together has just been tooling around in a car, maybe doing something like getting our nails done or going to eat. Like that's
Right.
basically maybe
Right.
sightseeing,
Right.
taking you to see things or you taking me to see things. But that's most of our time together is conversating
No,
and
I
me
agree
coming
with
to
you.
you for advice and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that vacation times are times for that, but in between vacations, I think that it's sort of imperative to have conversation with your children. I had a service guy here many years ago, and he was anticipating the birth of his child, and he was nervous, and somehow he felt like he could tell that to me as he was leaving the house. And I said, I'm going to tell you what I think is the most important thing. Start talking to that baby immediately. You start talking. The baby's a baby, so you coo with them and you teach them how to make sounds and you read to them because they're just infants. But you don't wait until the kid's 10, 12, 14. You have to have those conversations all the time that are age appropriate as they're growing up. So when they get to those ages where you're worried about, you're not going to have to worry because they've already heard your sense of morality, your feelings of what good character is, and you won't. They've seen it, they've watched you in action, you've talked about it, and now you don't have to worry about. Because I hear lots of parents, oh, I'm dreading the teenage years, and I'm like, well, I feel like I had pretty good. Even though I know I don't know certain things, I didn't have all that crazy that some parents go through. And I also realize that some parents are afraid of what that's going to be like because they knew what kind of teenagers they were.
Yeah.
And see, I was a very boring, placid teenager. There wasn't anything my parents really had to worry about with me.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that my parents were always talking was very helpful in that I felt like I was sort of part of them.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Not that they came to me with adult problems, but because we felt like a group,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I
A
think these
pod.
extended
Yeah.
conversations that we have and that our family has is sort of understanding that we all have membership in this group, and we're all going to be vulnerable with each other to a certain extent so we can share our experiences. And hopefully
Absolutely.
there's children there because the more children
See that. And
hear
hear
that, yeah.
Participate in that.
'Cause
Yeah.
Yeah, and back in the day, my parents talked about religion and politics and all those, things you're not supposed to talk about, but there wasn't yelling and screaming around it. They talked.
Yeah.
And I was there as a kid listening. So I think that's why I have sort of a more mild sense of being able to talk about those issues. So
Sure.
when I get in a group that can't do that, I'm sort of like, what?
What? Yeah.
Why
What
are
do
you going, why is everything going out of control right now? Why can't you just talk about this?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I was gonna say my partner and I we're both from the same area, so all of our families are in the same sort of vicinity, even though it's still a distance. We were talking recently, and this is where I'm different and where we differ. But I'm the kind of person that's like, oh, let's just all get together. everybody, both sides of the family. Let's just have a whole meet and greet and hang out and have a good family time. And recently, my partner was like, "Well, I think when we go out to visit, like, I'll just visit your family, and then next time I'll just go visit mine." Like they, I think they get overwhelmed about having to fit in both their family
Sure.
and ours. But I don't. I'm like, oh, let's go see everybody. I don't care how long a drive it is. Yeah, it's a schlep, or maybe it's not, but we can plan for it, or we can figure it out. Like, I am like game to make it happen. And
Sure.
it's a good thing that I have that, but I also think I overwhelm people by being so inclusive, because I don't see anything wrong with that. I'm like, oh yeah, let's just all get together. What's the harm in that? But I can totally understand too having those boundaries around how much family time our significant others have with their families and our families and all of that, because it can be overwhelming. But to me, maybe I'm kind of a social butterfly though, so I really like it, even though I can also get overwhelmed too. But I think growing up doing kind of those things anyway, I don't have as much overwhelm or anxiety around these family social gatherings.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think that what's difficult is, and maybe why the goodbyes get to be so long, is because if you're in a room with a lot of people, you don't really get to talk as much as you want to.
Yeah.
And so you have this little mini debriefing before you leave.
Right.
So that you can see, so you can at least touch base with the person that, a few of the people maybe that you didn't get to. Because I'll find myself, since we're talking about these extended conversations, I'll find myself sitting with like one person at a group gathering and having this long conversation, and then realizing I haven't had a chance to talk and see everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then when we start to leave, it's like, oh, I have to make up for that right now. And so the goodbye gets long because I'm trying to make up for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that the Jewish goodbye doesn't just exist in the physical, well, yeah, in the physical world of gatherings, but also over the telephone. Right. Many, many times we've had conversations, and I'll say, goodbye, I love you, goodbye, I love you, and you'll be like, goodbye, I love you, bye, bye, love you, bye, love you, love you, bye. Yeah. And it's fine, but
totally.
It's like, that's just totally what's normal to us. And for a long time I was like, when do I hang up? Because it's like one of us is still saying goodbye.
I'll tell you. Say, okay, hang up now. Okay. See, my father was different about that.
Okay.
So we talked about how his meticulousness was, but one thing he did do it when he was older, and there were a lot more people in his family because there were grandchildren and things, he was able to tell us when it was time to leave. Oh. And at first I'm like, that's abrupt. I don't like that. But then he knew. He knew that it was going to take time for us to get to the door and say goodbye. And then they would walk us out to the street. Yeah. And maybe sometimes put us in the car, or if we had car seats, or whatever it was. And so he knew that there was going to be this time to get to the car. So he would just tell people, okay, gotta go. Yeah. You gotta go now. And this was his own children and stuff. But I was like, and then I realized that was a good boundary. At least I knew where he stood.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't have to guess, am I overstaying my welcome? Do I have to go now? Is anybody going to tell me it's time to go? And he would tell me. He would say to us, okay, it's been great. Out you go. Yeah. I mean, there's part of me that doesn't completely love that, but I did respect the fact that he was able to put a limit to how long he was going to have us there, when he knew it was going to take another maybe 10 or 15 minutes to get us out the door, to the car. Yeah. So he was planning for that in advance, I'm sure. And
in 20 minutes we start our goodbye train, 5 minutes till, okay, that's when we do our last hug. Okay, and we're going to wrap it up in about 30 seconds now. Okay, let's go. Everybody to their cars. Yeah.
Get out. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of being on, we were at Disneyland. Do you remember? I think you were 8, and we were on this, what is that?
I wore pink shorts, pink jean shorts.
Yeah, whatever that, the jungle ride. And
Oh, yeah.
the woman who was giving the tour was so funny, and she's telling us all this stuff, and it's really funny. And at the end, she looked at everybody. She goes, "Okay, get out." I'm like, "What?" It was hysterical.
I remember that.
That's it. We're done.
We're done. It's over. Show's over for real.
Yeah, no more. So it was really
Yeah.
funny. So that's what I felt like my father used to say in his head, "Okay, get out already." I was wondering how you felt about, I was saying earlier, the fear of missing out and having these fractured meetings, and that I didn't like that so much, but I understand it, as opposed to seeing your family on social media doing things without you.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Huh. Well, it's kind of interesting because as a millennial, I've grown up kind of on the cusp of not having tech. I had basically a technology-free childhood.
Right.
Computers didn't really come into play until I was in second grade, really, and even then, they weren't really used or integrated really until I was in college. Really, I mean, that's when social media really started to become more abundant in my life. So I don't know. I think yes, it bothers me. I think family is different. I think it's with friends in close proximity. I've had friendships where we're really close and then we kind of trail off and then we have to reconnect. And during
Right.
that time when we're not really seeing each other and I'm seeing them do things with other friends, I'm like, what the heck? What's going on here? I don't understand
Right.
this and I get hurt feelings. But then you also have to remember, like, people put their best stuff out on social media and it's not really realistic to what they're actually going through because photos could be within the last several days or day of, but they could also be from months ago. And you never really
Sure.
know unless you're in pretty close contact with them and their life. With family, I feel like because we're already at a distance, I have less power over having feelings around that. I would just rather choose not to have strong feelings around that because we're all living our own lives. Now, would I like to have more communication overall from extended family? Yeah, absolutely. And I think social media has helped to play a positive role in creating more communication. But yeah, it's hard, everyone's living their own lives and everyone's so busy and don't get me started on capitalism because that's what keeps families apart and all of that. If there's this is going to sound weird, but if there's one positive from being unemployed, it has been, and when I don't think about all the stress and anxiety of everything that happens when you are unemployed, the one thing for me has been I've had more time to connect with people I love and really take time to do that. And that has been a beautiful thing. And I think about it, I'm like, what's happening in my life that I get to do this? And it's like, oh, I'm not working full time. I might
Right.
be working, but I'm not working this full time schedule. So it's like, there's room for things. Wow, who would have thought? There's room for
Right.
things. There's room for people you love more than just your partner. Because obviously a lot of our time is spent with our nuclear family or our partners, and like that's all you have time for. But now it's been a beautiful
Right.
thing for me to be able to spend time with folks and more time with them. But anyway, yeah, so I know the social media stuff can sting. I really do, because you're just kind of like, doo-doo-doo, I'm going to post this and I'm going to live my life. And then you don't realize maybe the ramifications of sharing so openly because you might be hurting people's feelings, but then also maybe it's up to the people that have hurt feelings to share that with, I don't know. I don't know. That's a whole other topic. Maybe we should talk about social media and communication and
Yeah.
expectations and boundaries and what's expected and what's the 411 or the rule of thumb for family and friends and social media and how we use that tool, but also how that tool can be it's both isolating and transparent, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. Wow, that is that. Yes, that's friction, isn't it? Right there.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine and we're kind of figuring out our relationship as it relates to our business and our friendship and how we're realizing like we have to hold all of these things at once.
Right.
Maybe we're going to be annoyed or pissed off or mad or hurt or all of these things, but we still have to, at the core of it, we know we love each other and we know that we care about each other and we want what's best for the other, but how are we going to navigate all of these challenges to our relationship? And I think we don't really talk about that enough, where I'm referencing The Bear, that TV show. That's kind of been popular the last couple seasons. They're on season 3, not as great of a season. But what I kind of love about their family dynamic, and they're based in Chicago, and it's very loud Italian family, and I grew up with Italians and grew up with Jewish folks, so it's like kind of the dynamics can be loud, right? Or just like very expressive.
Yep. Passionate.
So I'm used,
yes.
yeah, passionate. And I kind of love how they're like, F you, like, what are you doing? I don't appreciate that. Like, they're just like being really direct with each other. But at underneath all of that is like, I love you and I'm going to have your back. And sometimes I would appreciate, maybe the style isn't my style, but sometimes that directness I would appreciate more often than not with family, with friends, with community members, because I want that. I'd rather you just be direct with me and we have this understanding with each other, whether we've communicated it or not before. Maybe we should communicate it, but that there's like this deep appreciation and respect, but also I'm pissed at you. You hurt my, like, you know what I mean? Shit like that. Yeah. You pissed me off, whatever, or I feel hurt or whatever, using I statements, trying to get better about that. But yeah, but still underneath all of that, it's like, hey, we're going to resolve this somehow.
What is good about that is, well, obviously the directness is good, but everybody needs to know the rules of the game. And so everybody's in on what the rules are, because if you have somebody who can't take your directness, then you've created a whole other problem. So you have to know who you are with, because somebody who has a difficult time with hearing something about themselves directly, it could be a bigger issue.
Criticism.
And it's criticism, and then there's defense, and then it boils over into all kinds of crazy, and then somehow you get blamed for that.
Absolutely.
So,
I think this is something we don't establish with people in our lives. How do you like to be communicated with? How do we have those conversations if you've hurt me, if I've hurt you? We don't really talk about that. And then, because I'm dealing with that too, it's like friendships that I feel hurt, and I also cause issues too, because I'm afraid to be vulnerable. And then I just let it go, and I end up taking space from a friend or whatever it is, and then I'm like, okay, maybe finally I'm now able to come to it and have a conversation with you, but then maybe it was too long. Maybe I waited too long, or maybe I feel hurt and I'm like, well, you should have come to me to resolve this because you hurt me. But that's assuming that person knows they hurt me. And it's a lot. Communicating.
It is a lot, but you said something earlier, and I think I kind of shook my head. You saw that. They're not seeing that. But people, if you ask a person what's your communication style, they will think that they're the most open person and sensitive and empathetic. And then push comes to shove, they don't have any idea what their communication style is.
Exactly. So, yes. And then
I mean, most people don't think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Butting heads, but you don't want to, but it's like there's tension, and it's because we come from our own family dynamics. I mean, we're talking, this whole episode is about how these conversations that we've had and Jewish goodbyes, and it all revolves around conversation and talking and communicating. But so then when you have friendships and relationships outside of that, you're bringing whatever you grew up with, and then they're bringing whatever they grew up with, and then you're trying to piece together a relationship and communicate based on what you were taught and modeled. And if what you were taught and modeled isn't proper, I wouldn't say proper, but like maybe it's more toxic than not, then you're going to continue to model and do the toxic behavior to your friends or family or whoever until you relearn how to communicate. And I think unless you're an adult that's going to take responsibility or even knows that they're communicating poorly or things like that. I'm trying to learn how to communicate better with everybody in my life, and I still fail, and I make mistakes all the time. I get defensive, I get wounded, I get critical of myself, I get critical of other people, all of that. The core of our family dynamics is like conversations. That's a major theme. Yeah.
Well, you reminded me of, I'm thinking about all these settings when I was little growing up, and I remember the generation before me, they were kind of in their faces at times. They wouldn't argue about, let's say, politics, religion, but they would argue about behavior.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like, we didn't like what you said, or we didn't like what you did, or why did you take yourself away, and how come you didn't tell the family, or all that. And they actually, it seemed to me that they were able to do that I'm not saying that the consequence of that was positive. I don't know that it generated any close feeling in those moments, but my family, my parents were part of that, but I think they were trying to move away from that. And I don't think they did it as successfully as I would have liked it to happen. So I think their children, that would be me and my other siblings, probably don't do that as a rule. So we have sort of this politeness.
Right. Right.
That often
doesn't really get you anywhere.
Right. It doesn't hurt any feelings, and it keeps everybody. But there are times where you just want to say, "Come on, what the?"
Yeah.
Right. And then something really happens, you have to figure out how you're going to tell them, and then you wind up not telling them, or you write a letter and they don't get it, or whatever it is. Yes. I don't mean they don't get the letter, they don't get the sentiment. Right. So maybe the Jewish goodbye for some families is a way to make sure that when people are leaving, everybody's okay.
Right.
And and for those of us who who have families that don't rock each other's boats, it's just a way to say goodbye again and still and also be nice, just like you were for the 4 hours you were together. Yeah. Right.
At the end of a scene or something, and I feel like Jewish goodbyes are a button to the event or the moment. They just end it nicely.
Well, that's a good ending. I think.
Yeah, you don't want to model our Jewish goodbye?
We could, but I like the idea of that. It's like my father. Where's the button?
Where's the button?
Here's the button. We're done.
We're done. Okay, love you.
Love you too.
Bye, talk to you later. Do I hang up
I
or
can't
do you
even
hang
continue. You hang up.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.